Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement called the White River Line, inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. After several weeks over at the layout, here I am back at the workbench. And you may have noticed in the last video that I have a new workbench. I got rid of the card table that I've been using for almost a year for my model making, and I upgraded to a workbench I bought over at Home Depot. In addition to having some extra space, it also moves up and down. So that should be helpful in getting some angles correct whenever I'm working on some stuff. And it'll allow me to work standing up if I want to as well. What I've got planned for this video is another Walthers kit. It's a wood coaling tower. And I'm hoping this will give me a good opportunity to use some of these new oil paints that I picked up as well, trying out some new weathering techniques. So with that, let's jump on in. As usual, I started by checking out the instructions for the kit. I probably spent a little more time with them than I normally do. I'm trying to get a little bit smarter about the order I do my painting, weathering, and assembling, trying to make it as efficient and easy as possible. I started with the base of the model, clipping it free from the spurs and filing off their remainders. This procedure is pretty standard, and I won't bother to show you too much more of it. Before I prime this base, I want to add a little texture to it, and I'm going to steal a technique I've seen armor modelers use to simulate the texture of cast steel. Obviously this base isn't cast steel, but this technique should be useful in creating a more rough concrete texture. I used a little plastic cement to soften up the plastic, and then used a paintbrush to roughen up the texture. It's probably going to take me a little more practice to get this technique down, but this coaling tower base is a good place to experiment. I can cover up my mistakes with some ballast later on. I also used a file and a scribe to add some cracks and other damage to the concrete. I'm also trying another new technique. Generally, I scrape off the paint in the areas that need to be glued, but this time I'm using some liquid masking from Vallejo to see if I can make this tedious task a little more tolerable. This stuff is thinner than I expected, so we'll see how this turns out. After letting the liquid masking dry, I sprayed on some light gray primer and let it cure overnight. Next, I sprayed some concrete, lightened with just a little bit of white. I started the weathering with a gray wash. Then, I dry brushed it with some sky gray. And then another coat of gray wash. And finally, a filter of dark green for algae and moss, mostly on the back side of the shed. After the base was complete, I moved on to the shed on the back of the tower. The interior has some little indented round circles from the ejectors for the molding. I tried to use some modeling putty to fill them in, but because of these ridges, it was difficult to get the putty in them well. I decided to go the other direction and sand down the area around them. The wall adjacent to the tower won't really be seen, so I didn't bother too much with the circles on it. I'm using a different treatment on the outside of the shed than the inside, so I'll paint the inside of the shed before I paint the outside and assemble it. I cemented these panels into place on the interior of the shed. Then I airbrushed it with some Israeli sand gray primer. After waiting for the primer to cure for about 24 hours, I applied concrete. Using golden brown, wood, and light brown, I painted the individual boards, attempting to vary the color and create a variety of hues. I generally make the boards darker in the middle and lighter on the edges, and attempt to simulate wood grain to some degree. Now, let's see if I can take what looks like it belongs in a 1970s Hanna-Barbera cartoon and turn it into something a little more realistic. For this, I'll be trying my hand at these newly acquired Abteilung 502 oils. Oil paint is a medium I've never used before. First, I applied a gloss finish using Revive It floor polish mixed 50-50 with isopropyl alcohol. I let this cure for nearly 36 hours, although I probably didn't need to wait that long. I experimented a bit at first since I haven't used this medium before, and because I really haven't attempted to replicate this kind of treated wood I'm finding in my prototype pictures. The inside of the shed will be a great area to experiment, since it won't be closely examined when it's on the layout. Here's the technique that I came up with. I started with a color called Brown Wash, and brushed it on the sides and the tops of the vertical boards. I painted a little bit sloppy, counting on the paint to overlap onto the panels. I then thinned the paint down with odorless thinner and applied it as a wash on these horizontal boards at the bottom. After letting this dry, I used some thinner on my brush and streaked the paint on the vertical panels on the top portion. I kind of switched back and forth from using the thinner and using a dry brush. I let all of this dry for about a day and applied another gloss clear coat. Then I used a wash of this color called Bitume. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. After another 18 hours or so of drying, I added a matte clear coat. I airbrushed a bit of black on the bottom to simulate coal dust. This is a dump shed for hoppers that'll be delivering coal to the coaling tower. I also experimented a bit with carbon black pigment from Vallejo. I mixed it a bit with acrylic thinner from Tamiya, but this removed a little bit of the black I'd airbrushed on. I might want to let this paint cure for a little bit longer next time, or maybe apply a matte clear coat before adding the pigment. In this vein, I added a final layer of matte clear coat to protect the pigments. They can be quite easily disturbed. With the interior complete, I started on the exterior, beginning with a primer of light gray. I then applied my base coat of olive green. Most of the pictures I've found online of this kit, completed by other modelers, have kept the shed dark brown like the rest of the tower. However, I found this picture of a coaling tower from the Denver and Rio Grande with a work shed that has been painted. I like the way this looks, so I'm going to paint my shed. Although obviously I'm choosing a different color. This actually turned out a bit darker than I wanted, so I'm going to have to figure out a way to fix that. I started by combining a mixture of sand and white into a wash. After letting it dry for 15 minutes or so, I applied a sponge to get a slightly mottled effect. This is actually a bit more subtle than I'd hoped for, but I've got another trick up my sleeve. But first, I added a dark gray wash to create some shadows in the wood grain and the joints of the siding. When it was dry, to lighten this dark green and create an oxidized paint look, I mixed up a lighter green by adding some off-white to the olive green and dry brushed it on. I'm not going to spend too much more time weathering this shed. It really just kind of sits in the background, but I did add another dark wash. Then I painted the trim sky gray. I didn't get too picky with this. Again, the shed isn't the highlight of this piece. Then I assembled it. Let's see how this liquid mask worked. This is marginally easier to scrape, but I didn't get it applied to all the places I needed to. I'll keep playing with this and see if it's something I want to use on a regular basis. I might add another wash or filter down the road, but this is done for now. With the shed and base completed, I began assembling the back wall of the tower. In my attempt to be a little bit smarter about the order of paint and assembly, I'm trying to attack this project in sections based on finishing techniques and the accessibility of the surfaces to be painted. For example, on the shed, it would have been very difficult to paint the inside once it was assembled. If I had assembled it on the base before painting the exterior, I would have messed up the base as I painted that. The finish on this back section will all be the same, so it makes sense to assemble it before I begin paint and weathering. If I were to do more assembly than this, 1, it would be difficult to add the inside details like the coal chutes, and 2, it would be difficult to apply the finish on what will be the inside portion of the tower. The thing I like about these old school emery boards is that they are pretty easy to modify and get into tight spaces. As I prep these pieces, I used my X-Acto knife and some sandpaper to add some more textural detail to the model. Well, I did my assembly a little out of order, and I'm having to work a little harder to get this front panel on the conveyor portion of the tower than if I had done it correctly. That's one of the gripes I have about these Walthers kits. I don't feel like the instructions are very easy to decipher. The diagrams are too cluttered, and you're faced with a wall of text and written instructions. It can be easy to misread them, in my opinion. I moved on to assembling the front portion of the tower. Just like with the back, I carved up a bit on the edges of the wooden beams so they wouldn't look so perfect. I used 100 grit sandpaper to add some wood grain texture. I also used my scribe to add some indications of joints. With the main assembly of this section complete, I added the horizontal beams to the front. It can be a little hard to make out on the diagram, but there is a front platform with a railing. I'm going to leave this off for now. It'll get in the way of painting, and there is a good chance it'll get damaged during the painting process. It looks pretty delicate. I moved on and added the horizontal beams and rungs to the sides. There are a few pieces I'm leaving completely separate for some of the paint and weathering process. First, the sides of the head house. There isn't much gluing surface available since I'm keeping the back and front separate for now. Second, the bin floor bases. Attaching them now would make both it and the bin floor difficult to paint. I got a little bit of a start on assembling the detail pieces like the coal chutes, but this is more or less a good stopping point for now. Lately, I've been giving some thought to providing other ways for my viewers to support my channel. Clicking on the like button and subscribing is always really appreciated. However, I thought of creating a Patreon page. But what kinds of benefits from becoming a patron would you be interested in? Maybe you'd like to buy some stickers or a t-shirt from a web store. Maybe you'd like to buy something from my Amazon wish list. Let me know in the comments of other ways that you'd be interested in supporting me. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and those links are in the description below. As always, thanks for joining me for this episode. Next time, well, I'm going to continue working on this coaling tower. So, join me again then as I continue modeling the White River Line.